Can a people simultaneously prepare and prevent war? That's the admonition that Albert Einstein gave us back in the 1940s after being the architect of one of the greatest innovations mankind has ever known, the breaking of the atom, the cracking of universes, and the unleashing of great power the world had never seen before. Einstein knew something, that this question, this simple question of whether or not a people can both simultaneously prevent and prepare for war, was more than just a simple sentence that it presented itself as. It required a country, a nation, leadership to actually look at itself and determine one path or the other. Both of them very difficult to do, but necessary for a pacifist like Einstein. And it was in this era, this era leading up to the Cold War, that Einstein posits this question. Again, a man uniquely positioned to ask this question as the physicist who unleashed this new technology that could destroy mankind on the Earth. He understood from the physics, from the mathematical part of this, that having this type of devastating technology and the gazillions of dollars we've spent investing in the infrastructure to deploy and destroy one another, both with atomic and nuclear weapons, ultimately meant that at some point the statistics would suggest that they would be used. Now, fortunately, to this point, we haven't. But what we created as a society, the theory, the working theory that we used to provide a bulwark against mutually assured destruction, was what the great foreign policy thinker George Kennan described as deterrence. Deterrence being the idea that you could build up military might, hold up and find a balance that would allow for one nation to not make that first strike in terms of destroying the other, and through this, essentially, this idea of mutually assured destruction, we would prevent ourselves from descending into nuclear annihilation. The deterrence theory is ultimately what was the rationale behind our involvement in places like Vietnam and the Korean Peninsula, our meddling in the affairs, the governmental affairs of places as far as Southeast Asia and throughout Latin America, trying to limit or prevent the growth of the communist threat. Communism, of course, in the span of 70 short years had grown 2/3 larger than what freedom, or we called American-style freedom, this movement away from monarchy, away from authoritarianism, had taken us 200 years to accomplish. Soviet-style communism had done more than double in just 70 short years. So naturally, there was going to be fear and fear of one another. But Einstein tells us that you can't do both simultaneously. You have to make a decision. Are you going to war or are you not? And after we emerged from the colossal damage and the extraordinary loss of human life during the Second World War, we grapple again with this decision. Deterrence comes to the forefront of foreign policy thinking and the American mindset. We realize that even the way that we approach war has to change. And in the late 1940s, under President Truman, we literally changed the Department of War to the Department of Defense, a very significant change in foreign policy, a very significant change in the mindset of the American people who are trying to put the idea of global conflict behind us. But just last week, as Donald Trump and an embarrassingly select few of world leaders, many of whom are despots themselves, gathered together under the banner, under the rubric of this board of peace. Perhaps the most telling part was who was not at the table, as opposed to who was at the table. But even more striking than that was the fact that while we were literally posturing as being the promoters of global peace, we were simultaneously positioning for war in the Middle East. Literally at the same moment, the United States military was moving aircraft carriers for positioning in the Mediterranean so that we could launch airstrikes into Iran. Now, if this seems nonsensical, it's because it is. If it seems like we're being schizophrenic in our foreign policy, it's because we are. At least at best we are. Because you have to either assume that we're either unaware of this bifurcated nature of our actions literally at the same moment, the same time we're having a press conference and a gathering of world leaders under the banner of the Board of Peace, we are moving military, the greatest military the world has ever known, into a position to strike and kill and decapitate other political regimes in the Middle East. At the same moment that we're doing that, it's impossible not to mention or notice or take into account the hypocrisy, the deep hypocrisy of that moment. And say what you will, there will be arguments on both sides of this, some more valid than others, about whether or not we should be posturing to move Iran, whether or not we should be working to remove this regime. All valid, all worthy of discussion. But the point of what I'm trying to make is, when Einstein admonishes us and reminds us that you cannot do both at the same time, you cannot postulate and position that you are a maker of peace while also a manufacturer of war at the same time, he's essentially predicting the hypocrisy of this American moment. That can't escape us. We can't look past that. We can't pretend like we're not a part and parcel of that. And the truth of the matter is, while this all happened last week, it didn't begin last week. The movement towards war has been a concerted strategy of the second Trump administration. Remember, we enabled previous airstrikes on Iran, bunker busters. We knew it was happening. We were aware it was happening. The President of the United States was tweeting about it hours before it came to pass. Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of War, the new renamed Secretary of War, was found to be on signal with a reporter from The Atlantic on the same chain talking about the strikes that were coming. We decapitated the political regime of Venezuela. We threatened the invasion of Greenland and questioned the military commitment of our NATO allies in taking up arms to defend that NATO member against us, the United States. And as I mentioned earlier, one of the first acts of the Trump administration was to change back the mindset of the Department of Defense, literally to the Department of War. So make no mistake, Albert Einstein was entirely accurate as the pacifist he became after unleashing this extraordinary power of the annihilation of human life through atomic energy and through the splitting of the atom, and recognizing that at some point humanity was going to have to make a choice to either push towards peace or to relinquish the manufacturing and building of arms for no other reason than the fact that once you set upon that course, statistics would suggest that what you are building will ultimately be used for its intended purposes. And I think we have to reflect. We have to take some self-inventory and ask ourselves, is this contradictory statement that we're making to the world right now, trying to be both the promulgator of peace under this banner, this faux banner of a board of peace, or is the rest of the world watching, and all of us in the United States along with it, as our mighty military capacity positions for what will ultimately be human destruction, the loss of life on potentially a destabilizing scale that could easily swallow the globe again into an international global conflict. I, as somebody who was steeped in the 80s under the belief that strong military might led us to a stronger position to defeat the Soviet threat during the Cold War, that only through the acceleration of military spending and increasing the capacity of our military might could we preserve peace. Even somebody like me has to stop and pause and say, wait a second. In this new global era, with the decline of U.S. hegemony is the strategy that we pursue with rising middle powers focused on acts of war, acts of aggression, and a mindset towards conflict, is it sustainable in a way that served us arguably during the Cold War, sustained us arguably in the post-World War or the post-Cold War era? Is it sustainable as a viable theory of the case in foreign policy and geopolitics to both act as a preserver and protector of peace, but also the strongest military force in history taking position to destroy life and property at the same time? Increasingly, I'm of the opinion that Einstein was right and prescient with the statement that you cannot both prepare for and prevent war simultaneously. Love to have your thoughts. Leave them in the comments below.